I was sold like livestock. And all they got from me was a bag of rice. That sentence still echoes in my ears, even after all these years. My name is Elza, but back then, at just 13 years old, no one ever used my name. I was the girl, one more mouth to feed, the burden. I grew up in the dry back, where the wind scraped your skin and hunger lived inside the house. We ate plain flour with water and slept, counting stars through the holes in the roof. That morning, my mother woke me early. She didn't look me in the eye. She just said, "Put on the blue dress. The one that's less torn." I thought we were going to town, or maybe visiting a cousin. But the silence in her voice said otherwise. A tight silence, like she was holding back tears. We arrived at an old man's house. He wore a straw hat and smelled like tobacco. He looked me over like someone picking out a chicken at the market. He walked around me, nodded, and said, "Looks strong, she'll do." And that was it. He went inside, came back with a sack over his shoulder, and dropped it on the ground. A sealed bag of rice. "That was the deal," he said. My mother hesitated. She was shaking. But she lowered her head and picked up the bag. I didn't understand at first. Not until she started walking away, without calling me to come. I shouted, "Mama!" She didn't answer. Didn't even look back. And in that moment, I knew. I was no longer anybody's daughter. The first night in that house is a memory I've tried to erase. But it always finds a way to come back. The old man didn't speak much. He just pointed to a thin mat on the kitchen floor and said, "That's where you sleep." Then he closed the door to his room and turned off the light. I sat on that mat, holding my knees, trying to stop the cold from getting inside my bones. But it wasn't the cold that hurt, it was the emptiness. I felt like I had died but was still breathing. The next morning, he handed me a broom and said, "Clean everything. Start with the backyard." I obeyed. I didn't know what else to do. Every time I moved slowly or asked a question, he grunted or threw something. One time, I spilled a cup of water. Just water, and he slapped me so hard my ear rang for hours. He didn't even look sorry, just lit a cigarette and walked away. There were no children, no wife, no kindness, only orders and silence, except for the radio. Every night, he turned it on loud while he drank. Sometimes he talked to himself. Other times, he stared at me in a way that made my skin crawl. I started sleeping with my back against the wall, just in case. I was 13. I should have been in school, laughing with friends, complaining about homework. But instead, I was a shadow in a house that smelled of sweat and smoke, with bruises hidden under my sleeves and a fear that never left my throat. One night, I dared to ask about my mother. "Can I write her a letter?" I said, trembling. He stared at me for a long time, then laughed. "Letter? She sold you, girl. You think she cares where you are now?" I don't know what hurt more, his words or the fact that, deep down, I believed him. That was the night I stopped being a girl. That was the night I promised myself, if I ever get out of here, I will never be silent again. Time passed differently in that house. Days blended together like dust in the wind. There were no weekends, no holidays. Just the sound of chores, the crackle of his radio, and the fear that crept into every breath I took. But somewhere inside me, something refused to break. I started watching everything, his habits, his routines, what time he drank, when he left the house, where he kept the keys. I didn't know exactly what I was planning, I just knew I needed to be ready if a chance ever came. Sometimes, he'd leave for hours. Those were the only moments I felt almost human again. I'd sit on the back steps, look up at the sky, and whisper to myself, "You're still here, Elza. You're still alive." I began hiding bits of bread, saving scraps. I also started talking to myself in the mirror, the tiny cracked piece above the sink. Not to check my face, but to remind myself I had one. I'd whisper, "You're not invisible. You matter." Even when my face was swollen from a slap. Even when my hands bled from scrubbing floors. One night, I heard him stumble through the door, drunker than usual. I knew what that meant. I hid behind the cabinet, holding my breath as he mumbled curses to the walls. He knocked over a chair and passed out right there on the floor. I stood there for what felt like hours, heart pounding, too afraid to move. And then, I saw them. The keys, they had fallen from his pocket. Right there, next to his foot. I didn't touch them, not yet. But something shifted inside me that night. I stopped waiting to be rescued. I started preparing to rescue myself. That week, I found an old newspaper under the mattress. On the last page was a tiny map, an ad for a hardware store. But it showed streets, a route. I studied that map until I could draw it in my mind with my eyes closed. Every day, I rehearsed my escape in silence. I counted my steps from the kitchen to the door. I memorized the creaky floorboards. I tested the gate latch with a string tied to a spoon. Each small act was a rebellion. A declaration. I will not grow old in this prison. I will not die forgotten. And one afternoon, when the sun was high and he was deep in a nap, the keys jingled again. This time, they didn't fall by accident. This time, I was ready. The heat was thick that day. The kind that made the air stick to your skin and thoughts blur in your head. He had drunk himself into a deep sleep again. Mouth half open, snoring like thunder. The keys were on the table this time. Carelessly dropped, like always. But now, they didn't scare me. They called to me. I walked quietly, barefoot, each step calculated. I didn't even breathe through my nose, afraid the sound would wake him. When I grabbed the keys, they jingled. Just a little. I froze. He shifted in the chair, murmured something. Then, silence again. I waited. 1 minute. 2. My heart beat so loud I thought he'd hear it. Then I moved. The door creaked. The gate groaned. Every sound felt like a scream. But I kept going. Step by step. Past the rusty bicycle. Past the old dog that didn't even lift its head. Past the cactus bush that always scratched my arm when I carried water. And then, I was outside. On the road. I didn't run right away. I walked calmly. Like someone with purpose. Like someone who belonged out there. But once the house was out of sight, I ran. I ran like the wind owed me something. I didn't know exactly where I was going, just that I had to follow the river. Like the map in the ad had shown. I remembered the names of streets. I remembered the color of a billboard. I remembered the feeling of fear and told it, not today. I ran until my feet bled. Until the sun dipped low. Until I saw a sign that said, Bus Terminal 500 meters. I didn't have money. No bag. No name anyone cared to remember. But I walked into that terminal like I had a ticket to somewhere better. I approached a woman selling snacks, and I said, "Excuse me. I'm lost, and I need help." She looked at me. Looked into me. And for the first time in a long, long time, someone saw me. She brought me water. Asked no questions. Later, a policeman arrived. I was shaking, but I told him everything. My name, my age, the house, the bruises, the bag of rice. He didn't doubt me, not even for a second. That night, I slept in a shelter bed. It was hard, cold. The blanket was thin. But I slept like someone who had taken her name back. The shelter was quiet, almost too quiet. No shouting. No slamming doors. Just distant footsteps, the clink of dishes, and the whisper of other broken girls trying to sleep. I lay there, eyes wide open, wrapped in a thin blanket, listening. My body was safe now, but my mind, it was still trapped in that house. Every sound made me flinch. Every silence made me ache. The next morning, a social worker named Teresa sat beside my bed. She didn't speak right away. She just looked at me with eyes that didn't pity. They listened. And when she finally asked, "Do you want to tell me your story?" I surprised myself by nodding. The words came out in pieces. Some were whispered. Some trembled. But for the first time, they came out. The rice, the slap, the loneliness, the mirror, the keys. She wrote everything down. Not like a detective, like someone honoring a truth. And when I finished, she reached across the table and said, "You're not what happened to you, Elza. You're what you choose to become." I didn't believe her at first. But something about the way she said my name, like it actually mattered, planted a tiny seed inside me. And tiny seeds, when watered, can crack concrete. In the weeks that followed, I met other girls like me. Different stories, same ache. Some had been left at doorsteps. Some had survived worse. But in each of their eyes, I saw something familiar, a flicker, a fight that hadn't died yet. We braided each other's hair. We painted little drawings on notebook pages. We whispered dreams into the dark, like maybe they'd come true if we said them out loud. One day, Teresa gave me a new toothbrush and a second-hand sweater. It was red, a little too big, but it was mine. I put it on and stared in the bathroom mirror. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't just see a shadow. I saw a girl with scars, but also with strength. And I whispered, just like before, "You matter." Only this time, I believed it. It had been almost a year, 12 months of learning to breathe, to trust, to exist. I was attending a small public school nearby. The other kids didn't know my story, and I didn't offer it. They just knew me as Elza, the quiet one, and that was enough. Every week, Teresa would come by with paperwork or news. One afternoon, she sat down with a strange expression, calm but heavy. She placed a photograph on the table. It was worn, torn at the corner. But I knew that face. Even older, even more tired than I remembered. It was my mother. My chest tightened. I didn't know whether to cry, scream, or run. Teresa said softly, "She came looking for you." I couldn't speak. My tongue was stone. My mind screamed, "Now she wants me." After everything, Teresa continued, "She's been through a lot. She was forced to give you away. Not out of cruelty, but out of fear. The man she gave you to was her debtor. She thought he'd let you work, not hurt you." She paused. "That doesn't excuse anything. But I thought you deserved to know." I stood up, walked in circles. Tears filled my eyes. Rage and longing clashed inside me like fire and water. Part of me wanted to see her again. Part of me wanted her to suffer like I had. But something in me whispered, "You'll never move forward if you don't face the past." So I said, "Bring her." When she arrived the next day, I froze in the doorway. She was smaller than I remembered. Grayer. But those eyes, they were the same. She looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. Then she whispered, "Elzinha," and something broke inside me. I didn't run to her. I didn't hug her. But I let her speak. She said she had tried to find me for months, but no one would talk. She had left the man weeks after I disappeared, afraid of him. She begged for forgiveness, but she never asked to be called Mom again. She said, "I know I don't deserve your love. I just want you to know I never stopped praying for you." And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. Some wounds never close, but some souls never stop trying. I didn't forgive her that day, but I started walking toward the day I could. After my mother left the shelter that day, everything felt heavier, but also clearer. For weeks, I avoided mirrors again. I was afraid of what I'd see. The little girl who was betrayed, the teenager who escaped, or the woman I was slowly becoming. But one morning, something shifted. It was during literature class. The teacher asked us to write an essay, a moment that changed your life. My pen hovered over the page for a long time. And then, without thinking, I wrote, "The day I was sold." The words spilled out like water breaking through a dam. I wrote about the bag of rice, the mat on the kitchen floor, the mirror above the sink, the escape, the fear, The choice to survive. When I finished, my hands were shaking. I handed it in anyway. A week later, the teacher pulled me aside. Her eyes were glassy. She said, "Elza, this is the most powerful thing I've ever read." She asked if she could share it anonymously at a community event. I hesitated. Then I nodded. That night, my story was read aloud in a crowded room. People cried. Some held hands. And for the first time, my pain didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a bridge. After that, other girls came to me. Girls I thought were strong and untouchable. They whispered, "Something like that happened to me too." And I realized, when we speak the truth, we give others permission to do the same. So I wrote more. Not just essays, letters, poems, even short stories. Stories where girls escaped, where they fought, where they won. Teresa encouraged me to submit one of my stories to a youth writing contest. I didn't expect anything, but weeks later, I received a letter. I had won. My piece would be published in a local magazine. They wanted to print my name, Elza. I stared at those two words for a long time. Not the name of someone forgotten. Not the name of a victim. My name. On a page, telling the truth. And in that moment, I made a promise. If the world tried to erase me, I'd write myself back in. It had been 5 years. 5 years since the gate creaked behind me. 5 years since I ran with blistered feet and a heart full of fear. 5 years since I stopped being property and started becoming a person. I was 18 now, taller, stronger. My voice no longer trembled when I spoke. I had a small scholarship and was studying literature. I was writing more than ever. My words had found their way into classrooms, shelters, even the hands of girls who thought they were alone, like I once did. Then one day, a call came. Teresa, who had become like family, called to say there was a small event in the town where I was born. A youth empowerment program was being launched, and they wanted a speaker, someone who had turned pain into purpose. I froze. I knew exactly where that town was. I knew the roads, the trees, the smell of dust and diesel. I also knew he might still be there. The man, the one who traded for me like I was nothing. Part of me wanted to say no, but another part, the stronger one, whispered, "You're not running anymore." So I said yes. When I stepped off the bus, my stomach twisted. Every corner looked familiar, but smaller now. Less frightening. Time does that. It shrinks monsters when you grow bigger than your past. The event was in a school auditorium. Rows of metal chairs. Kids in uniforms. Teachers fanning themselves with papers. When they introduced me, I walked up slowly. And then, I spoke. I told them about the girl who had no voice. The girl who was exchanged for rice. The girl who hid in silence and later found power in storytelling. The room was silent when I finished. Then someone clapped. Then another, until it grew into a wave that wrapped around me like a blanket. Afterward, as I stood near the door, a woman approached. She looked nervous, older, worn. She held a crumpled photograph in her hand. She whispered, "You don't know me, but I know him." My heart skipped. "He died last year," she said. No one claimed the body. No family, just a name written on a torn ID. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt release. Like a door I'd never dared to touch had finally swung open on its own. That night, I walked to the old road one last time. The house was still there, crumbling, abandoned. I picked up a stone and placed it on the gatepost. Not for him. For me. A symbol that I had returned. Not as a prisoner, but as a survivor, a woman, a writer, free. After that trip, something inside me shifted permanently. I had faced the ghosts. I had stood where I once cried, and I hadn't broken. I had bloomed. But healing isn't the end of a story. It's the beginning of responsibility. I began volunteering at shelters. The same kinds of places that once saved me. At first, I just read to the girls. Quiet stories. Fairy tales, sometimes. But slowly, I began sharing pieces of my story. Not the darkest parts, not yet. Just enough to let them know. I've been where you are. And I'm still standing. One day, a girl named Lucia came to me after a reading session. She was maybe 12. Tiny voice. Big eyes. She whispered, "Did someone sell you too?" I nodded. She took my hand like it was a lifeline. Then maybe I'll be okay too. That moment lit a fire in me. Because stories heal. But safe spaces save lives. With Teresa's help, I started a project, small but real. We called it Voices That Won't Be Silenced. It started in the back room of a church. Mattresses on the floor. Donated books. Volunteers with kind hands and warm food. We didn't have much, but we had each other. And we had truth. Word spread. Girls came. Some barefoot. Some crying. All carrying stories in their eyes. We gave them shelter, yes. But also notebooks, pencils. We told them. Write, draw, speak, scream if you must. But never go silent again. Eventually, a journalist heard about us. She published an article, "The Girl Who Was Sold Now Saves Others." It went viral. Donations came, and one day, I stood inside a real building, walls painted soft blue. Shelves of books, a quiet garden in the back, and I cried. Not for the pain, but for the miracle. We had built a home out of the rubble they tried to bury us in. And in that space, I saw versions of my younger self, girls who would no longer be invisible. Girls who would not have to run barefoot into the world to find safety. I wasn't just telling my story anymore. I was helping others write their own. Sometimes, late at night, I sit in the garden behind the shelter. It's quiet there. The flowers don't judge. The wind feels like a mother's hand brushing my hair. And I think about her, the girl I used to be. The one who slept on a mat, too afraid to cry. The one who whispered into a broken mirror, just to remember she existed. The one who ran with nothing in her hands but her name. I carry her with me, every day. Not as a wound, but as a root. Because I know now we are not what they did to us. We are what we do with what they did. Sometimes I imagine going back in time. Finding her on that dirt road, barefoot and trembling. I'd kneel down, hold her face in my hands, and whisper, "One day, you'll write books. One day, you'll change lives. One day, they'll say your name with pride. And none of this will define who you are. Because I was sold. But I was never owned. I was silenced. But I never disappeared. And now, my voice echoes in pages, in classrooms, in shelters across the country. Girls write to me. They say, "Because of you, I told someone. Because of you, I stayed alive. Because of you, I believe I matter." And I tell them, "You always did. You always will." I still carry scars. Some you can't see, but they remind me of something important. That I am not a tragedy. I am a revolution. So, if you're hearing this, if someone ever made you feel like less, like nothing, like a thing to be used and discarded, I want you to know, you are not forgotten. You are not alone. And your story is not over. This isn't just my story. It's ours. And it's just beginning.